Hi, mate. Thanks for joining me. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. And obviously, I think we'll just sort of kick straight off with obviously a lot of the people watching this will be Notts fans. They'll be interested to know kind of what's happened for you to leave. So I guess I'll just kind of leave it as a very open question. Obviously, not long ago you were assistant manager at Notts, and obviously now you're not. So I guess the floor is yours to explain from your point of view how what's happened. I guess.
I always knew, well, the long story is I always knew I wanted to go into being a manager, and I knew that when I was a player and where I'd played under different systems that I didn't enjoy, and I was definitive in what I wanted. And obviously, it goes all the way back to Wealdstone, really. Me and Stuart went in at Wealdstone, and we kind of assumed that role as joint managers. Like we always said to each other, that's what it would be. Obviously, in terms of names and titles and stuff like that, it never really concerned us, but the dynamic was obviously Stuart was working full time at BT, Craig was a full time PE teacher, and I kind of left my job to go and do it full time. So I could dedicate all of my day to planning and creating the structure and the kind of evolving the blueprint that I wanted, which I was quite definitive on anyway as a player. But there's a lot more detail when you move into the kind of managerial coaching side of it. So yeah, I always knew I wanted to do it, and there was never ever a right time to do it. But from where I'd assumed that kind of role and the responsibility of preparing the team at Wealdstone, because I had the time to do it, I kind of felt like I'd been doing it for a long time. And I think this was like 4.5 seasons now of that dynamic. And like I say, there was never a right time to step away because obviously I work with people that I enjoy working with. And for me, it was always about feeling like I'd evolved the blueprint or my blueprint to the point where I felt like it was indestructible, like it was solved, like I put the final piece into it. And I think the Christmas period was kind of that turning point for me because you've come in and seen how I want to work and stuff, and you know the detail that we go into in terms of how we play when a team presses us. But the one thing that I'd never really felt like I'd solved was like a man for man press. And I really wanted to get that down before I ever left to kind of go on my own because I didn't want to ever be in a situation where I didn't know what to do or be able to give people the answer. So the catalyst for that is, I'm going to go into a lot of detail here, but the catalyst for that was the Salford away game. We lost 3-0 at Salford away and we played a box. Obviously, people know, even at Wealdstone, that we played like a 3-4-3 box midfield. And we lost 3-0. And listen, the pitch was tough and there was a lot of excuses. But fundamentally, for me, the structure wasn't right when I watched it back. I watched it back about 10 times because I'm obsessed. I'm consumed with football and I can't leave it until I know the answer. And I went away and watched it and I kind of saw something within it. I won't go into too much detail at the moment, but I saw something within it that I liked the look of if that ever happened again. And always at Notts, if a team come 4-3-3 and pressed us 4-4-2, whatever, even at Wealdstone, we could always find a way to dissect their shape. Whereas the man for man was the one thing that always was hard. And even before we were there, I remember Boreham Wood did it to you in the playoff games. And Luke was very, very good at it. He did it to us at Wealdstone as well. And it was always really hard to solve. And I felt like that day at Salford really made me look into it a lot. And the moment for me over Christmas was the Cheltenham game. So they came man for man with us. We expected them to be a 4-3-3, and we were going with a box to obviously pick them off and they come man for man. And they went 1-0 up after not long in the game, probably 5 or 6 minutes. And where I'd seen something in the previous game at Salford, I wanted to change it. So we got the lads over, we stopped the game. Obviously, there's a signal for Bassi to go down. And we got the lads over and I changed it to 3-5-2. Obviously, anyone that's watched us at Notts and Wealdstone will know that's quite often the case. We'll get the goalie to go down and I'll get the lads over and I'll try and change it from the side of the pitch. And I got the lads over. We moved Josh Martin down the middle with AJ and we changed the structure to 3-5-2. Dan Crowley went into the 10 and we kind of took them apart from that moment. I think quite quickly we were 2-1 up and we won the game 5-3. And that moment for me was kind of where I felt like I'd finished the blueprint. I'd finished what I was trying to evolve. And you've seen a lot of the work that I've got and the detail that goes into it. And that for me was the turning point where I never really knew what the right time to step away was and go on my own was. But I'd spoke with my family a lot previously because it was always on my mind. And I said that once I kind of got that blueprint finished, that was the time to now go on my own and kind of take the credit for my work and it be my name because football, you get criticism and you get credit. And now it's time as a manager to kind of go and take that and be on the end of the criticism and be on the end of the credit. And like I say, that was the turning point over Christmas for me. We played Bradford, who we beat 3-0, who obviously are doing very well. We beat MK Dons, which if you'd have seen the prep that went into that game, because obviously I rate Scott very, very highly. I think he's a very good coach. Well, he's a very good manager. And the way his teams play is very similar to how I want to play. And the amount of detail that went into that game and the way that it worked and the way that we pressed them in a certain way and then the way that we kind of manipulated our shape to keep the ball from them and go through them. It was a really good period where I felt like I had a lot of different challenges and I'd overcome them all. And then the final one was that Salford and Cheltenham mix. And I felt like that was the point for me where I think, okay, it's finished. I need to go on my own now.
Yeah, well, just to build on that, from a Notts point of view, and talking about credit and those kind of things, obviously you mentioned turning point. And I feel like at the moment that's I guess where Notts are in the season. It's kind of turned a corner and well, very close to the top of the league now. Will it be almost a little bit bittersweet in a way, like the work you've put in and say Notts go up? Again, you talk about credit, your name won't be synonymous with it because you now left the club. But do you feel like, the a lot of the work you've put in will still be there carrying the team forward? Does that make if that makes sense?
Yeah, listen, I never ever wanted to leave when I felt like there were things to solve because I'd have felt personally like I was kind of responsible. I wanted to leave at a time where I felt like when I left, they had everything to carry it on. So it was very simple, not simple, but they kind of knew exactly if they come with this press, this is what we do. If they come with that press, this is what we do. And like I say, people will probably think I'm mad stepping away at that point. But for me, say we go in and won the league or we got promoted. I'd have what I'm like. I'd have wanted to go and do that in League One and build everything again in League One and show you can do it there. So for me, there was never a right time to step away because there was always going to be a challenge that I'd have embraced. But that's why I said like I spoke with my family a lot and Craig and people that I trust, and that was for me the right time. And I felt like I could leave. Not even the recruitment in terms of what I'm like watching the 21s games. Um, Obviously I had watched like Charlie Whitaker and Will Jarvis and people like that they were bringing in. I mean I tried to get Will Jarvis to Wealdstone, but we couldn't get him there because we couldn't have accommodation because obviously financially we didn't have the budget for it. But we'd agreed a deal with Hull, him and Oliver Green, a centre midfield player, were going to come, but we couldn't get the accommodation sorted out. So he was a player I'd watched loads for Hull, and he was a player that I obviously put into the club to sign as a wing back because he's very much like Ryan Colclough, but in my opinion, he's slightly better in the final third. And you see that in the game the other day when he played as a wing back. He was excellent. He set up the goal for Charlie. And Charlie was another one that I'd watched for Everton. He played against Leeds the first time I saw him, and there was Charlie Allen on the left for Leeds, who's gone to Linfield. He did really well in the game. There was James De Bayo, who's at Leeds, a centre half, and then there was Charlie, who was playing kind of off the front in like a sort of like a hybrid role off the front and dropping into the 10. And he was someone again that I'd identified a lot. I went and watched him again against Stockport and stuff like that to see him in men's football to see if he was right for us. And he was another player that I loved, and he was kind of fit the mold of what we recruited before off the front. So we always had like a Medialito, a Reece Brown at Wealdstone. Notts, then you had David McGoldrick popping off the front. And Charlie was a player that I felt could play off the front, but also play in the eights or the tens, whatever you want to, we call them pocket players. So they play in that kind of box midfield at the top of the box. And obviously, knowing that they were bringing them players in and they were players that I'd put to the football club, I felt like the structure was there now. So no one could break it in terms of man for man. Every other press, I felt like we had the solution to. And then the structure, knowing that the structure was there and then the recruitment was there as well, so that it was going to be a strong end of the season. For me, my work was done, and it was kind of yeah. Listen, if they win the league, my analogy is that when you have a builder build your house, if you walk out, if it's good work, it won't just fall down when you walk out the house. My dad's a carpenter. When he walks out the house, he's put the roof on. If it falls down, it means his work is shoddy. So for me, I want them to go and win the league. I want the relationships I've got with all the staff and the players and some of the messages I received when I left from even senior players like David McGoldrick and people like that. I want them to go and win the league, and I will love it if they go and get into League One. Because I said to him when I left, I want them to be the group that go and take the club back to League One. That will make me happier than anything else. So yeah, listen, it'll be weird, but I'll love it just as much as anybody else because it means my work was good, and also the people that I get on with and I built really good relationships with are having success. So that will mean a lot to me.
My next question is kind of like a two-parter, and the first part answering my own question really by saying, is the next step being a manager? I think you've already alluded to that, and the second part of that is, do you think that the change will just be kind of or not only in name alone, because obviously you've got responsibility and pressure and things like that, but do you think that from what you mentioned with recruitment and obviously at Wealdstone, you being the full-time member of the coaching staff and things like that, do you think that the step into management might be a little bit easier, I guess, for you than some other assistants because you were quite hands-on, especially at Wealdstone, obviously as well at Notts, but because of that dynamic in terms of the working hours?
Yeah, for me, that's why I've done it because I feel like it doesn't scare me the step, and that's why I'm saying because the way we work, we were joint managers, and I always took the responsibility, even when I know that when we came in, there was a really tough period at Notts, and we had to change a lot. And I know obviously Stuart, like there was the stupid banners and things and that got put up, but I kind of always took that on myself and saw that as myself. So the kind of pressure of it all, I felt like I was still having that same pressure. I never relinquished that pressure. I always took that on, and if it was his name that was getting the credit, I enjoyed it as well. And if it was his name getting the criticism, I wanted to change that and I wanted to change it quickly. So we always had that relationship. And I know Stuart had that relationship with Dean before. Obviously, then that's how he ended up at Wealdstone as the manager because they were kind of joint managers at Hemel and things like that. So yeah, for me, it doesn't scare me going into management because I've done it now for 4.5 seasons effectively. I wanted to be at a point where nothing could surprise me, all managing budgets and things like that. I was involved in all of that stuff. So yeah, I think it would be a hell of a lot easier for me than other people that probably haven't quite been involved as much as I've been. So yeah, that's kind of why I'm excited to do it because I know I've been doing it for 4.5 seasons, and now I kind of want to go and create it somewhere where they've never played football before in terms of passing football and possession-based football, and I want to create it and it all kind of be new, and that's the excitement for me of that kind of project.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting comment, and we'll come back to that. I wanted to just quickly ask you about, again, the timing in terms of a lot of people at the time, I guess, put two and two together and got five in terms of Wealdstone becoming available around the same time that you left. Again, just a kind of an open question for you to, I guess, clarify or whatever you want to, however you want to put it. But the Wealdstone links for you to the job. Was there anything in that, or was that just a coincidence in terms of timing?
No, so it's just I'm not ignorant. I know it looked like there was something in it, but it was genuinely a coincidence. So the game I went to at Wealdstone was the Her Game 2 game for Wealdstone. And obviously someone called Lee Rumble that works at the football club. She looked after my nieces when I was there. So she had an unbelievable relationship. So it's like a family day out that I ended up jumping on at that time. And then obviously the day before, I think, a couple of days after, Matty ended up going to Solihull. So for there to have been something in it, I'd have had to have preempted Solihull coming to get Matty. But I'm not ignorant. I understand people thought at the time that I was going back there, but I know I have a really good relationship with the chairman at Wealdstone, and obviously Neil was someone that they had identified a while ago, and he kind of fit the criteria for them. So that was never anything more than a coincidence. But I understand why it looked the way it did.
No, definitely. And then just to bring back to that comment about the playing style and philosophy and just to build on that more, is that something that you kind of want to go to? Because I guess it'd be you stepping out on your own. So obviously, Wealdstone was again you helped build an identity there, and Notts already had that kind of that passing style of football and possession, basic control. Is that something that appeals to you? Then going somewhere rather than say going back to Wealdstone, who have already, I know they've I guess moved away a little bit from that identity, but it's still within I guess the club ethos. Is that something that excites you going to a club that's never had that kind of style before?
Yeah, definitely. I think someone that wants to go on that journey is pivotal to kind of the job that I take. I don't want to go in somewhere where it's going to be conflicting styles of play and they're going to lose faith in it after one game and things like that. I want someone that's strong on their philosophy and they want that now. And I think that's becoming more prevalent in football. I think there's a lot of teams, like League Two teams, National League teams, that are kind of wanting to go down that route. They look at the success even that we had at Notts, and a lot of people want what we created there. And for me, that excites me going and doing it somewhere totally new and kind of being the architect behind it all. Like I say, I've done it at Wealdstone, and I felt like that was more kind of a blank canvas because we could changed everything there. I had to change the playing style, the philosophy. We had to become more professional. There was a lot of things I had to change there. Whereas at Notts, like you say, it was already kind of in place, and that's why for me, Notts will always have success is because there's alignment in the way that they want to play. So when the day that Stuart leaves, whether that goes up or down, the person they recruit will be aligned with what they want. So, yeah, for me, I'm looking for that. And obviously, the way I play, the way I want to play, and the way that we've always played under the teams I've worked with, is relentless. It's demanding for people, and they need to understand it. And every press, I always look at it. There's probably 4 or 5 different presses now. There's 4-3-3, there's 4-4-2, there's 3-5-2, there's 3-4-3, and now there's man for man. And I want to and what I've always done is I've made everybody understand it because I've always said the power's not me knowing it. It's great that I know it, but the power is that the players understand it and the coaches understand it, and we're quick to, like I say, when I get the players over and I tell them, right, they're pressing like this now. This isn't what we prep for. I need them to know straight away what to do, and that for me is what has always enabled us to overachieve because we can always not be reliant on the players because players get sold, players come and go, players get injured. What doesn't ever get injured and what very rarely gets solved is a blueprint and a structure that can't ever get injured. So that's always got to be your biggest asset at any football club. And that for me is something I want to go in somewhere and I want to put that in totally fresh and kind of open people's eyes to it.
Talking of that word structure, I think that's been something that's I don't know if it's been associated with Notts this season, but it certainly should have been because as much as the defenders and goalkeeper brought in have certainly improved the defence, the big I think big part of the improvement has been the structure. Would that be something that you agree with that, and that's something that you had to address last season from conceding so many goals to this season being one of the best defences in the league?
Yeah, and when I talk about structure, I'm never just talking about in possession. I'm talking about the way we defend, the way we press. You look at it this season, we've probably pressed the best we've ever pressed in terms of as well, relative to the level. Obviously, when you have Macaulay Langstaff down the middle pressing National League players, no disrespect to them, he can kind of press 2 or 3 players on his own. Whereas you look at the way we've pressed at times, the way we've pressed at goal kicks, that's all come from days and days and hours on a tactics board, looking at how to cut all the angles off and making sure that we can press in the right way. And to be fair, people like David McGoldrick, he's been incredible this season, but he can't keep pressing and pressing at his age. So I had to work out ways to press where at times we went man for man. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we went man for man. But also, like I say, structure isn't just about imposition. I want to get the ball back as quick as I can, and I want to take the ball off. And to be honest, that's a little bit of an ego thing. My ego on the side, I don't want the team to have the ball, so I want to take the ball away from them, and then I want to keep it and open them up and dissect them. And yeah, the way we've pressed is a big part of the success we've had this season, and a big part of the success that they'll have till the end of the season. And players like Charlie Whitaker, they will only add to it because they've got so much energy and they're so kind of willing to learn and evolve with that. So yes, like I say, we conceded 89 goals last season, and now I think we're the second best, well, not to the second best defensive record in the league. And again, I'm not going to go into loads of detail, but a big part of that I worked on with them in pre-season was about there's 3 sort of defending zones that I want or we want, and we worked a lot on that. And that was something that evolved. To be honest, I didn't know exactly what I wanted at Wealdstone with that, but that was something that evolved a lot, probably in the last year, about the 3 defending zones. About the first one in the line has to cut off the space between him and the goalie, and then the 2 behind can be really, really aggressive. If they know that space is cut off, then they can be really aggressive with the way that we defend our box. And then obviously the wing back has to come right round on that side of the ball. And there's loads of details about when you can release and when you can't release. And even Jacob Badeau, I worked a lot with Jacob Badeau when he first come in because he played in the back four a lot. Sometimes he was going out to press people that were crossing the ball. Whereas as the outsides of a back three, if he goes too wide, that affects the middle centre back and then the centre back on the opposite side. So we're working a lot with him about not going out to support the wing back, and he needed to take that front space and that front zone, which is the first kind of defending zone that I talk about. And you look at the way we've defended our box, and Notts have defended their box this season. It's been excellent. I don't know how many clean sheets it is now, but I know it's into double figures, and that's going to be a huge part of their success. And people go on about passing the ball and opening up and scoring goals. We were the team that created the most, well, the highest XG and all of the stats in the attacking favour, but our defensive data was very, very good as well. So yeah, you have to marry the two up. If you want to have success, you have to. You can't just be reliant on scoring more goals than the opposition. So it's something I worked on a lot in pre-season. And for me, pre-season is the most important part of the season. I know people will look at now as important, but for me, now what you did in pre-season will carry you through these periods. And if you get it right, and again, pre-season wasn't relentless in terms of running for us, but it was relentless in terms of detail and meetings and individual meetings and stuff like that I worked on a lot with the defensive side of it and the back three and the back five. And then also, you know, what we worked like in terms of the attacking side of it with the playthroughs and the structure and stuff like that. So yeah, that 6 to 8 weeks was vital for me. And it is at any club. You look at any club we've been at, we've kind of been top of the league or in the top 3 after the first 5 to 10 games. Even at Wealdstone we were. And that for me is the work that we do in pre-season. Obviously, we need to get the lads fit, but for me, structure is the most important thing. And it's like I liken it a lot to I use analogies a lot in football because sometimes with football, your emotion clouds your judgment, whereas when you take it and take a different situation, and it's a lot like the London tube system. If you want to get to the other side very quickly, you need to know what time that train's arriving. You need to get it needs to be perfectly planned, and the structure of your journey needs to be perfect. And that's the same with football. If you want to move the ball quickly, if you've got no structure, you ain't moving the ball quickly because you don't know where your player's going to be, where your mate's going to be. That relationship, it's not in sync and it's not quick. So when people say about move the ball quicker, you can only move the ball quicker if the patterns and the structure have been worked on religiously and they've been drilled in. So yeah, that's kind of always been my philosophy in terms of, and it's the same with my dad when I played as a player. He drilled like step overs and Cruyff turns and stuff into me and my brother. So that kind of identity of drilling stuff in and it being second nature has always come from somebody like him. So yeah, that's kind of why I work the way I work and why I think the structure has enabled us or enabled Knots now to be where they are.
No, definitely. I like that analogy as well. I'll use that myself with my coaching. In terms of energy, you mentioned there of the younger players. I wanted to touch on that because it's something that you mentioned before about the under 21s and watching a lot. And I know from you personally, you go to a game almost every night, and you're always at watching and especially the PL2. So again, it's kind of an open question, sort of for all yours to talk about that more a little bit and how important you think that the younger players are to work with, because I know at Wealdstone that was the large part of your recruitment, and Notts it's starting to reflect that with Charlie Whittaker and Will Jarvis and players like that, and obviously George Abbott as well has been massive. So again, there's a little bit of an open question for you to talk about PL2 and how useful you think it can be.
I think it's vital. I think when you look at, especially in the Premier League's different because you can't recruit players better than the level on loan because there is no level better than the Premier League. But you look at even when Lampard was at Derby, obviously he had Mason Mount, he had Harry Wilson, and he had Tomori. And what you can do with the 21s market is you can get players at a fraction of the cost that are way better than the level. Now, George Abbott at the moment is, for me, he is the best player in League Two and he is the best player in League One, or one of the top players in League One if he went into that level. I think he's a middle-end championship player at the moment. And for obviously what we're probably, well, what the club would be paying for him, you just would never get a player of that level for the money that you're paying. So George is an interesting one because George was one I watched a lot. So I watched him in his Tottenham days because obviously they're a London club. So I watched him a lot when I was at Wealdstone as well. And funnily enough, I've probably watched George 6 or 7 times, and I pushed a lot for George to come into the club because, to be fair with Notts, they've got an unbelievable like team model and data, and obviously people will know the mod. They kind of call it the model as like a broad term, but their model is very good in terms of the team and stuff like that. But they don't have data on the 21s football because there's not big enough sample size. So it was something that when we came in, I wanted to push a lot in terms of adding loan players because I think prior to George, you had Grealish and maybe someone else that had done well as loan players, but it had kind of been unsuccessful. And obviously, where we'd used it a lot at Wilson, where I'd watched the players load. So I'd watched George probably 6 or 7 times. In his last game, he played against Bristol Rovers in the Bristol Street Motors or the Papa John's, and he was really poor on the day. And I remember joking with George when he come in, saying that game almost put me off bringing you in. But because I'd been to all the other games, one game wasn't going to change my opinion of George Abbott. And that's where, if I'd only watched him twice, and the first time I'd seen him, he was good. The second time I'd seen him, he was poor. He wouldn't be at the football club now. I wouldn't have wanted him. I wouldn't have pushed for him to come in. But for me, you have to know what you're going to get with the loan players. I don't want to take a loan player off of a recommendation. Recommendations are great, but I want to go and watch them, which is why I go and watch all the under 21s games because I think the market is so lucrative because you can get players at a fraction of the cost. And the success we had at Wealdstone, I think we had George Wickens, who's now playing in League One. We had Jaden Sweeney, who's playing for Leyton Orient in League One. We had Sam Howes, who went to Leyton Orient in League One. We had Connor McAvoy, who is probably a Football League player, but he's had a lot of injuries. So we had so much success from loan players. And you look at it now, even Jarvo and Whittaker that have been brought into Notts now, that was mainly to bring in as a loan. Obviously, when the negotiations got further, obviously I know both have come in as permanent players, but they were with a view to a loan. So these players, for me, can take you to the next level. Now, surrounded with bits of experience and key details like that, like George Abbott wouldn't be the same player without Matty Palmer next to him. There's not a shadow of a doubt. It's the same with Hinchy when Hinchy comes in and he plays with Matty Palmer. You need that experience, and that's where you need to get your recruitment right in terms they need to complement each other. And it's the same with Matty Platt. Matty Platt's another interesting one. He was one I watched probably 6 years ago at Blackburn. He went on loan to Barrow under Ian Evatt in the passing structure with Lewis Hardcastle. So them two went from Blackburn. So I'd watched him years ago, and obviously his most recent club was Bradford, where they played totally different. So he played a lot of diagonal balls, long diagonal balls over the top, which is the way they play. And when he got brought in, obviously everyone wasn't sure whether he could actually play within the structure. But because I've watched him 5 or 6 years ago, watched him at Blackburn, then watched him at Barrow, I knew when I come to a League Two club, he was the middle centre back that was perfect. So obviously then we went in the summer and we went and got him. And you look at it now from a player that was not meant to be able to pass the ball, he looks like for me the best centre back in the league by an absolute country mile because he can do it all. He defends his box brilliantly, but he's very good on the ball. And it's the same with Jacob Badeau. He was a player that I watched at Aston Villa. So the 21s market isn't just for getting loans. For me, it's about understanding what these players can do further down the line because they may not go into a passing structure when they go to a club permanently, but it's about understanding what they can do and knowing what you get. So for me, I think it's one of the biggest markets, and like I say, the proof, probably all the way up to the Championship or the bottom end of the Championship. Because you look at Derby in the season that Lampard did really well, they had three players that were just way better than the level. So if you can use that market, listen, it's a at time it's a thankless market because sometimes you go to games and you've driven 2.5 hours to a game and there's nothing there, and you probably know after 20 minutes, and you sit through the rest of the game hoping that something comes up, but it doesn't. But that's the reality of it. If you don't put the work in, you don't get the results. And I went to Fulham Middlesbrough last night to go and watch that game, and there was a player that I was kind of specifically watching, but there wasn't anything else. And sometimes you come away and you think, was it worth going? But of course, it's always worth going. And sometimes you've got to get your head around that you'll go and you won't find anybody. But yeah, for me, that market's massive, and I think it's been a massive part of the success of the clubs I've been at. And I think Notts will carry on using it, and I think a lot of clubs are looking at that market now.
How important is that? You talk about sort of relentlessness quite a few times, and that applies also to you go into a game and you know within 20 minutes there's nothing there for you, and you mentioned that with pre-season as well. So how important is that? It seems like such a simple thing, hard work and repetition, but how important is that alongside the details and all those things? How important is that kind of repetitive work to get those details instilled in players and things like that?
I think it's the most important thing. I think it's how you distinguish yourself as being better than somebody else at any job, whether you're a painter. If you make a painting, it's about the detail and the work you put into it. It's the same in any industry, whatever it is, whether it's like carpentry, like my dad does. The details of the angles, the weight distribution, and all of them things are what separates him from maybe the next carpenter. And then there's probably, and again, another analogy that I use is like cooking a steak. Like me and Gordon Ramsay can cook a steak, but my steak, I'll come out at the end and I'll be happy with my steak. He'll look at that and he'll think that's bang average. That's awful. There's a whole nother level that you could go to with putting in more detail and more work. And for me, that's how you distinguish yourself as better than somebody else, and that's how you see. My philosophy is always about gaining an advantage, turning the odds into our favour. And I think that's the obligation of a coach and a manager, is to be able to turn the odds into your favour, to give the players the best opportunity to win the game. And it doesn't always work out like that. You can have the perfect game plan, but one of their players puts one in the top corner. And that's where you have to accept that football one game in isolation is a little bit of an anomaly and it's a little bit random. But I think that the work you put in enables you to turn the odds into your favour. And it was an industry that I gave up when I left to do the Wealdstone stuff full time. I was um, like a trader in horse racing. So I would go and analyze like the grass length, the turf structure, the wind, the draw bias at the track and things like that. So I was very successful at doing that because of the detail. I was never talented. I was never more talented than somebody else. I didn't really know it other than I loosely knew it because I enjoyed horse racing. But then when I went and studied it properly and I went into that detail, it always gave me an edge. And that's the same with football. I think as a coach and a manager, you have to give your team the edge and your players the edge. Otherwise, what are you doing? What are you offering as a manager? And I never ever want to come out and blame the players. And never ever ever would you hear us come out and blame the players, really. It'd always be first and foremost, what more can we do? And then internally we'll work and try and make us better if we made errors and things like that. But yeah, I always look at it. You've got a lot of time on your hands as a manager and coach. And if you're not trying to give your team the edge, then for me as a manager and a coach, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror. So that's my obligation, and I take it seriously. I'm intense. I've got no problem that I am very intense with people that are around me, and it does consume me. But for me, you look at the best coaches and managers in the world, I imagine they are very much the same. They're socially awkward, which I am a little bit in a group setting. I talk about football, I feel very comfortable, but I've got to be relentless. It's my biggest strength, and that's for me how you have success in anything that you do.
No, yeah, definitely. And I kind of wanted to ask you about sort of the level that you may go in and manage. Or are there any teams you've spoken to? Not asking you to reveal the sort of names of teams or any in particular, but kind of just interested to know kind of where you're aiming at as a manager, because it'll be the first time going in as officially as a head coach or a manager.
Yeah, for me, it'd be anywhere between League Two and the National League. I think because I know that, well, because I've essentially been a manager in all but name at them levels, I want to go and create it at that level. So yeah, that would be where I'd be looking at, and it needs to be the right one. Because, like I say, it needs to match how I want to work. And for me, an ideal thing in football's never an ideal world, but I'd like to do it in the summer because it enables me to then be able to instill my philosophy for probably 8 weeks before we go into a competitive match. And I think that's important. So I want to use this time, and this is a big part of why I stepped away when I did, because I wanted to use the time when you're working full time at a football club and the details that intense. Sometimes I felt like I neglected a little bit watching the 21s football, and I felt like a lot of my success come from knowing the players and building that portfolio of players. And this kind of 3 or 4 months now, I want to really drill down and make sure that I've got that edge in terms of the players before I go in anywhere. Now, listen, something might come up in the next week or so that I'm going, wow, like this really excites me. But for me, I want to be patient and take the right one that wants to match kind of what I want to do and replicate what I've created at Wealdstone and at Notts County. So that's what I'm going to wait and look for.
Well, I think that's the perfect way and moment to sort of round up on. So, Matty, thanks so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed it.
No, I appreciate it, Tom. Thank you, mate.